All right, guys. Very excited to be here with Alex Wall, who has a really nice background in both martial arts and specifically Buddhism, but also Zen Buddhism. And I'm excited to get to ask him some questions about this stuff and kind of dig in. So thank you for doing this.
No problem.
Um, I guess one thing that a good jumping off point that I kind of wanted to get into is like, uh, with Zen, there's kind of like this anti-intellectualism thing that goes on, and a lot of times I talk about this with my students in martial arts. Is like, hey, like you're actually thinking about this too much. That you need to get on the mats and do this. It's not, even if you were to understand it from an intellectual standpoint, that's not going to help you so much. Do you think you could talk like just a little bit about Zen and kind of how it takes that stance as opposed to a lot of other schools of Buddhism, which can be very academic?
Sure, sure. So, yeah, with Zen, one of the primary sort of tenets is um, transmission of the teachings outside of words and scriptures. And so, really, what that comes down to is you want the thing itself, like the real practice, the real realization, not somebody's story about it or somebody's else's interpretation of it, and to live that into your real life, your everyday life. And so, in terms of anti-intellectualism, um, Zen doesn't necessarily um, isn't necessarily anti-intellectualism. It's anti getting caught in it. Um, where you let's say you're trying to figure out some philosophical doctrine of um, let's say you're trying to understand the Buddhist teaching of no self and dependent origination, and you're trying to make it all make sense. Well, in time trying to make it all make sense, you really are just tying yourself in knots. And it's better to, hey, sit and have a cup of tea, do some meditation, instead of sit and tie yourself in knots trying to understand some theory.
Yeah, I guess what I mean by the anti-intellectual statement is like the problem cannot be solved through thinking,
Hmm.
right? Like the core issue that we're trying to get at, whether it's meditation or if it's something with martial arts, that it can't all be done through thinking. That there's a huge component of it that needs to be, like you were saying, like practical lived experience.
Hmm. Yeah, and that totally relates to martial arts. It's kind of funny. I can think of certain students that like to talk a lot while they practice, and they talk about, well, if you do it this way and this way, and I learned it this way, and so blah 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 blah, and so they're not actually getting their reps in. They're not
Yes.
actually developing the skill, and so like because I have people from at my school. Uh, who didn't learn Wing Chun from me initially. And so they're welcome to the school, and I value different interpretations, and it's all Wing Chun to me. Uh, but then at the end of the day, we got to actually do the drills and do the practice, and you know there's only so much talking you need to describe how to do a technique correctly, and then you actually do it.
Yes,
And kind of
100%.
the same with Zen in terms of um, there's only so much intellectualizing you need to kind of get a concept, and then you got to actually sit and do the
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah, it also kind of reminds me of the idea like almost the intellect is a means to an end. It's a tool that we could utilize in the practice, but it's not the thing itself. So at some point you have to kind of like leave it behind, right?
Hmm.
Like you might need an idea to start with of what you're doing, but at a certain point, that only gets you so far.
Hmm.
Um, it's interesting you bring up like having students who have trained other places before, and this is something that I encounter a lot too. It's surprisingly, even with Brazilian jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of like degeneracy that goes on in the sense of different people do things different ways, and one of the things that I've trained a lot of different martial arts, and something that's kind of like gotten deep rooted in me is that there just isn't one way to do things in general, and that it's okay for people to do things differently, but there is some value in exploring doing things differently. Do you notice with some of those guys that maybe they have a hard time just trying it your way? How do you handle that situation? Do you let them do it their way, or do you try to get them to do it your way, or do you kind of find a middle ground? Like, what's your approach to dealing with that?
Usually I go at it from a standpoint of, well, why do I do it the way I do it? Why do I prefer this way over that way? Um, even taking like let's say side control, just for example, since you have
Yeah.
a jiu-jitsu background. Um, so the way side control is traditionally taught in judo, you don't put the head under the arm. Um, and fun story, I figured this out teaching a kids jiu-jitsu camp because actually I used to teach kids jiu-jitsu
Hmm.
too, and uh, because I taught judo at a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school, and uh, we found out that the judo version of side control is better for pulling out a weapon.
Ah.
I did a little game with the kids where I gave them we had a samurai theme, and so I
Yeah.
gave them paper knives to stick in their belts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we brought out the paper knife. Yeah, I said, "Okay, go!" And you can bring out the paper knives. And if you're in side control in the judo way, you can pull the paper knife easier.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So
Totally.
there's all these little reasons of why certain things are done a certain way, and just to relate that back to Zen, in terms of the training, Zen can be very sectarian,
Yes.
um, and like the school that you're in has a certain way they do everything, a certain way that they
Yeah.
offer incense, a certain way you bow, a certain uniform you wear, and so. There's a place and time for that in terms of um, how it helps you have something to focus on, have the details to focus on, and bring your awareness to that, and not just kind of I'm going to do it my way kind of attitude.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Can get you into trouble when you are trying to develop a skill or develop awareness
Yeah.
because then you get attached to your way of doing it, and um, the kind of ego piece comes in. You
Yeah.
go to a different
Absolutely.
school, and say a jujitsu school, and they're using different terminology, or they say to do you know um, certain details on a scissor sweep. And they're like, well, I do it this way, and my teacher taught me this way, and then you keep doing it that way, and it's really you got to check your ego in that point.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value, at least from my perspective and in my experience, from just trying things other people's ways when you're well, the way I look at it, I was talking with a friend about this also is, if you go to a different school, you choose to train there, that for me, that's that's kind of like I'm giving them the role of teacher in that, and by choosing to step foot in their space. So I make the choice about whether or not I'm going to go to your school or not. Once I make that choice, I'm pretty much going to subject myself to the way you do things for the duration of your instruction. And if I have a legitimate question or I don't understand something, I'll ask it. But I just think that it's a waste of time to, even if my way of doing it is better, right? I'd rather just explore your way of doing it and see what's going on with that. And then at the end of the day, when I leave and walk out of the building, if I don't like what you did, I won't continue doing it, and that's kind of it. um, you touched on something pretty interesting that I've found, and this is something that I think is probably a part of Asian traditions in general, but something also that the Japanese bring to a very high level, which is like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but the rigidity of the structures around what we're doing. So, like, if you go to a judo class or like the example of Zen, there's very strict code of conduct, and it's even more so in Aikido, right? Around what you're doing, the way you bow, what you're bowing to the the head instructor, you bow to the front of the room, you bow to the, your training partners. There's these very like kind of strict code of conduct type procedural things, and that goes away in the, in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You don't see it as much. Even in some Chinese schools, you have some of that, but as you get more and more close with the teacher and you're more like inner door type stuff, a lot of that goes away. You're sort of just
Hmm.
like hanging out with the teacher. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the value of that type of stuff, because I think it's often demonized a little bit in the
Hmm.
West and from the Western standpoint. But I do think that there's a lot of value in it your system being internally consistent. So
Hmm.
when you do all those things, you have a certain internal consistency that allows you to find the meaning of what you're doing. But I'd wonder what you have to say about that.
Yeah, so exactly those things in terms of connecting with Zen and spirituality in general, it's really a mindfulness practice. Like those things of you bow when you come through the door, you bow onto the mat, you are showing respect to your partner. Um, those little details of which knee do you put down first when you're, going into Seiza or something.
Yeah,
All those little things are really uh, ways to become mindful and aware. And they're also ways that you're letting go of your ego. They're like, oh, I have to do it this way. So I have to give up the fact that I don't want to be put in this confined structure. But it's through that confined structure that you're finding the freedom. And so when you can let go of, this personal thing that you're dealing with, like I don't want to do it this way, and you can let go of that. It's like for example with dieting, the um I want to eat this because I want to eat this, and it's my life, and I want to, you know, eat half a box of cookies because I want to eat half a box of cookies. Well, what is that? That's what that comes down to is ego. And
yeah,
so the practice of letting go of the ego desires in on the mat can relate to your everyday life or like with relationships of okay, um I'll take my mom for example. There's some ways that she's really set in her ways, and you know, I just have, if my ego butts up against that, I just gotta let it go because it's my 75-year-old mom, and fighting about it's not gonna make anybody happier.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. This other person isn't necessarily going to change, and you have to kind of take them as they are, even if it irks you a bit, and sort of eat that in order to make the relationship work. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I had this funny experience when I was staying at a monastery. We were doing like four immeasurable minds training, um, and there was they have you take these like lay precepts, but there's like extra ones when you're on retreat. So like
Hmm.
one of them is you're not supposed to eat after noon, and I would get myself into a lot of trouble with this, and it really taught me a lot about desire and like how desire leads to suffering. So I would eat breakfast and I would be starving at breakfast time, so I would overeat, and then lunch was only 2 hours after breakfast, so I would still be full during lunch and not able to eat a lot at lunch, and then I would end up from like maybe 2 p.m. until nighttime being so hungry, which would then perpetuate the cycle again, that by the time breakfast rolled around I would overeat. So I went through this for like 2 or 3 days before I figured out, I was like, I'm just gonna eat moderately at breakfast, and then I'll be able to eat a normal sized lunch and I won't be so hungry throughout the night. But I remember thinking, wow, like, this isn't something that I would have looked at on the paper and said, this is going to teach me a lot about myself and about desire and about, about the Buddha's teachings. Yeah, I didn't think that looking at it. I was, why do I have to do this? And then I did it, and I had this whole cycle that I was, oh wow, this is actually this is something else. There's really some wisdom in this stuff that we're doing. So that what you said about the dieting really reminded me of that. I'm curious if you could share about just in the school that you practice in now, uh, what does training in Zen involve, and how does it work? What's your understanding of the layout of the path, basically?
So in the School of Zen that I'm a part of, the organization, um, the uh, the Order of the Boundless Way. So it's really based on a mentor apprentice model. It's almost like a craftsman type of thing where you're going and learning a trade from a craftsman. Um, and so it's really about that relationship and seeing how your teacher does certain things and lives into the reality that you're trying to live into. And that it's really a matter of they have more experience along this path. And so, well, what can I learn from their experience? And also get clarification of when you're stuck. Um, I think that the teacher-student relationship in Zen is in general really important.
Yeah,
Um, and then it's a matter of the teacher really helps you see when and where you're stuck and helps you see what you can't see. They hold that mirror up to you. Um, and at least in the Order of the Boundless Way, it's a very relaxed, informal relationship almost from the get-go.
yeah,
This isn't compared to like, let's say, traditional Rinzai Zen training where you are going to the teacher and presenting your understanding of a koan.
yeah.
One of
Or
those.
even I have a lot of experience in Vajrayana. I've been doing
Mhm,
practicing Vajrayana for 10 or 15 years. I can't even remember now. And it's funny because there's this huge emphasis on the teacher student relationship, but for probably the majority of the time I was practicing, I didn't feel close in any way, shape, or form to any of the teachers because they were placed so much like up on a pedestal and away from you, and your chances to interact with them were so slim and few to none that I just didn't really feel like I had that the closeness of the relationship. It was only recently that I found someone that I feel like I connect with in that way, and even still, it doesn't sound like as close as what you're describing. There's still kind of like this like space there.
mhm. And in terms of the path of Zen training in general, there's that piece, and there's also within the Order of the Boundless Way, there's a because it's a non-sectarian order, we do have a lot of leeway in terms of like how we express our practice and
Mm-hmm.
how we develop like what forms of practice are we going to do? Are we going to do Korean chanting? Are we going to do ooh, Vietnamese chanting? Are we going to do Japanese chanting? Are we going to choose koan practice or shikantaza or breath work or so we're given a lot of leeway in terms of how we individually want to practice, but the guidance comes in as like, okay, what are you really going to stick to? How are you really going to form your own personal uh trying to think of the word here like spiritual development, what path, how are you going to form this path?
Yeah,
And a lot of times it really does come back to um a sense of, hey, dude, figure it out for yourself. Like, so even with the
yeah,
teacher, there's a lot of you gotta take responsibility for your own shit, so to speak.
yeah,
That's really, take responsibility for your life, your practice, and the teacher's kind of there to make sure you're not cutting corners, so to speak.
yeah. Totally. That's something my Chinese my Tai Chi and Bagua teacher was really big on. Was people would come at him with lots of questions, and he would kind of just do this thing like this, like a fishing rod. He's like, yeah, you're just fishing. You need to practice and then cook it up, and then come ask me a real question. So it was always he would always talk about cooking it up. He's like, go 5 years and cook this up. Work on what I've shown you. You get the form, you get this general thing, and you'd be like, okay, go work on this, and then after a while you say, I don't really know what to do with my body here. You go, oh, okay, cool. You have a real question here. Let me try to help you through that, you know? Um, he would always say like he's not a teacher, he's just a guide, you
Hmm.
know, so you have to do the walking yourself. He's not gonna kind of carry you along the path, which it sounds kind of similar in the idea there that, you know, you're responsible for your own practice and you have to kind of put it together. And then if you're doing something that's not going to work, or you're kind of lost or going in circles somewhere, then the teacher kind of knocks you out of that.
Yeah. My teacher would say, if you're going to call yourself a cowboy, you better be able to ride a horse.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly the sentiment. So for your own practice, what do you find are the most important elements? You know, like do you do a lot of chanting or koan work, or are you more focused on zazen? What's the kind of like structure there? Maybe even just recently, since I'm sure it changes over time.
Yeah. So just meditation practice in general. I'd say I personally work mostly with mindfulness of breathing and shikantaza. That's kind of where my basis is. Um, I started out my kind of Buddhist work in Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage, which their meditation is very breath-based. And then as I got more into kind of what would probably be called more standard Zen,
Yes.
um, uh, shikantaza was a big practice of mine. Um,
Can you explain what that is just for the people
sure.
listening who might not know?
So shikantaza is just paying attention. It's bare awareness of the moment as it is. It's really like method of no method.
Yes.
It's also called silent illumination, um, or serene reflection. You're just being present. And so it's um, really meditation without an object.
Yes.
So you know, if you're doing breath meditation, you know, you're focusing on, you know, the sensation of the breath in your nostrils, or the um, the path of the breath, or the breath, the feeling of your breath in your stomach, or wherever.
Yeah, or
And
even in like Vipassana or insight
mhm,
styles of meditation, there's often an object that's taken up in the mind, you know, like you
mhm,
pay attention to, okay, I'm looking at impermanence. I'm
mhm,
examining the impermanence of the phenomena that are arising. Whereas
mhm,
with this, there's you're not trying to place the mind on anything, just being
mhm.
aware of what's arising.
Yeah. And that has probably more connection to okay, I'm gonna like butcher that. Dzogchen?
Yeah, Dzogchen and Mahamudra are very, very similar in the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the few things that's pretty firm in terms of the order of the boundless way is the first thing you're kind of start off with is actually a book that's was originally titled Meditation Without Gurus, or Meditation Without a Guru, by Clark Strand. He used to be the editor of Tricycle magazine, I think. And so what that goes into is, again, like responsibility for yourself. Like it's really about meditation practices, responsibility for yourself. And like you said, the teacher is really just a guide. And um that book details, you go from breath meditation and then move on to just general awareness.
Yeah.
That's also pretty common within like Soto Zen schools
Yep.
too.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think when you're first starting, that you need the breathing meditation just to calm your nervous system down a bit and be able to be present. And then once you've developed a little bit of like concentration, and you're calmer and you're able to sit there, then it makes sense to sort of practice without the need for a method. I read something I really liked recently about talking about meditation practice and Zen, talking about how it's not very much in Tibetan Buddhism up until the point where you do Dzogchen and Mahamudra, but even somewhat sometimes in the Dzogchen and the Mahamudra teachings, they have this, but also very much in the Theravada tradition that I studied. There's this notion of cultivation, and that you're like building something through
Hmm.
your meditation practice, but that's kind of not the idea in Zen, where it's more that you're experiencing what you already are and what you already
Hmm.
have. And I thought that that was really interesting. And it was interesting, especially we were studying Ratna Gotra Vibhaga in one of my Buddhist classes. It's also sometimes called Uttara Tantra, which is the third turning of the wheel of Dharma, the idea of like Buddha nature. And my teacher was like, "Hey, you know, you should write or talk a little bit about how this relates to martial arts." And at first I was like, what the hell is he talking about? I was like, what? I'm like, I was so confused. And then I started to realize that martial arts is very similar to this in the sense that we're actually endowed with a the ability to do these things inherently. It's more of an inherent endowment to understand how the body works and how to manipulate another body, and that it's actually already present within you. It's more a matter of sort of uncovering it than developing something.
Hmm.
And I was kind of like, oh wow, this is yeah, he actually has a point here.
And then also all the structures along the way really lead to no structure at the end. It's just
Yes.
extinction, you know, kind of the Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee philosophy kind of stuff coming in. But
Yeah,
in
no,
terms of that,
absolutely.
you learn a certain way of doing things, and then you're freed from that when you truly understand it.
Yeah. It's very interesting. You mentioned Bruce Lee, and I also feel this way about the founder of Aikido, and I'm sure there's some more martial artists out there who they people take snapshots of what their journey was and try to emulate the snapshot. So you have like the whole you know, people who are like Bruce Lee did Wing Chun, so I'm gonna do Wing Chun, then I'll be like Bruce Lee. Or then you have people like, well, Bruce Lee abandoned Wing Chun, I'm not gonna do Wing Chun, I'm gonna do this other stuff, and then I'm gonna be like Bruce Lee. um, and it's very interesting to me because what I my perspective is that, hey, like let's look at this as a journey that this person went on, and maybe the real way to be like them, if that's really what you want, is to go on your own journey and to
Hmm.
have your own sort of path, that where you have an arc of development. And I think that this is a very common structure to that, like what you mentioned, that you start out with these like very almost rigid, this very rigid framework, and that gives you a base of what you're doing, and that once you've sort of captured the essence of that a bit, then aspects of that scaffolding start to fall away, and you're sort of like kind of reborn into something more free.
Hmm.
I'm curious also about, you know, how do you feel like the parallel between your Zen training and the martial arts training, like how does that do, what are like, are there ways that you feel like the martial arts benefits your Zen training and ways that you feel like Zen training benefits your martial arts, and kind of what are those?
Yeah, so in terms of the relationship between um for Zen and martial arts for me, um martial arts become the forms, the routines, the ways that you're embodying your mindfulness, your concentration, your even compassion and things like that in terms of you know, let's say you're just like doing punching practice and you're
Yeah.
like, 100% focusing on your punching, or um, you're going through a form and you are um letting yourself not get stuck on the details, and are letting yourself flow through the form and become one with it, so to speak, where you're not it's a different practice than, okay, I'm going to look at the detail of exactly how I am moving in this exact position and perfecting this exact position. That's one aspect of training. And then there's the aspect of I become the motion. Um, and then, so that's almost so kind of an aspect of like shadow boxing, when
Yes.
you are just, you don't have to think, okay, uh, jab, cross, hook, round kick. jab, jab, uppercut. You're not thinking about it. You can just flow and do it.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then you take that on with like a partner, and then let's say it's like flow drills in jujitsu, and you are,
Yeah,
let's say it's like uh one person's on top, one person's on bottom, and you just flow from there.
yeah,
Some The person on bottom's got to get out, the person on top stays on top, and you just, you know, react and flow. And um, in fact, my first Zen teacher related um, Zen, the Zen dialogues between teacher and student to Wing Chun sticky hands, chi sao practice, where if you think, you're caught. The second you think,
yes,
you know, um, there's a jujitsu person that said, uh, if you if you think you're late, if you're late, you muscle. If you muscle, then you're tired, and then all right, then it just all you just
yeah.
get
You're gonna
punished.
lose.
Yeah, and so like that was really a big helpful saying for me in terms of jujitsu, because I jujitsu and groundwork in general is really really hard for me.
Yeah.
Like the groundwork, like it did not come naturally. I'm a stand-up guy. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think that
and
it's not something necessarily inherent to our creature, you know, like a lot of it's very counterintuitive.
yeah, and for I felt like for myself, I was extra like I always felt like my natural reaction was the opposite of what we should do. And uh so getting to the point where I kind of knew the paths that are good paths to go, so to speak, was helpful to me. And then being able to trust my reactions and flow um was very helpful. And in terms of like, let's say it's another area of my life. Like let's say I'm a elementary school teacher.
Yeah,
After so many years of that, I know the flow of a classroom, of how to respond, how to, you know, get 16 6-year-olds to PE on time.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I think for me too, because I teach kids jujitsu 7 days a week, and from all ages, from like we have little 3-year-olds all the way up to teenagers. That it's a great platform to practice Buddhism. The development of mindfulness and compassion, your patience, all these things. Like it's a really valuable way, and there's so much there. Like it's such a rich environment to learn from in that sense. I find that it's a really incredible training ground for a lot of these things.
Mhm. For me, I think the other place that um, martial arts and Zen really come together is in sparring.
Yes.
Well, that's kind of like your daily life. That's when, the rubber meets the road in terms of like, okay, are you really able to apply this stuff? And um, that's where you see your stuck points. And that's
Yeah.
where the Zen and martial arts really come together in terms of, um, all right, you're sparring. Uh, man, this guy's got a reach advantage on me. I'm not being able to get in. I'm frustrated. And that's like, bam, you got to work with that right there.
Yeah. Yep.
And, um, if you get caught up in that, um, you're definitely going to lose that bout, so to speak. But also uh, being able to be okay with not winning. And in
Yes.
terms of like martial arts, in terms of, um, like where does that, uh, winning versus being okay with a draw. And that's really where the ego piece comes in with it. I'm okay not winning. I can get out there and train and go, and I don't have to win every match. I don't have to, even as a an advanced person, letting go of that. And
Yeah.
my judo teacher, when I got my black belt, she said, always keep somebody around that can kick your ass. That's what those like her parting words.
It's good advice, honestly. It's very important. How do you feel like about there's a big like importation of Zen concepts into martial arts, and I kind of have two minds about these types of things where on the one hand, I'm always happy to see things that I'm a fan of get a bigger uh reach, to get to more people and get them in front of more eyes, and maybe it gets people into the actual practices. But then also sometimes it results a little bit in like watering down of the concepts. But how much, are there concepts, like motion or one pointedness and these different things? Do you ever integrate that into your martial arts teaching, or do you try to keep
Hmm.
things separate?
No, I do. Because for me, my teacher said that, if you don't do the spiritual side of martial arts, and he was Muslim, he wasn't Buddhist,
Yeah,
and his teacher was kind of like he taught Zen philosophy and Taoism and I Ching and Chinese astrology, and he's just kind of a knew all of that kind of stuff.
yeah,
And if you don't develop as a person, if you don't not developing as a human being through this, then like okay, you're just a fighter. You're just learning violence. Like,
yeah,
if you really just want to do violence, there are easier ways to just do violence. And
yeah,
so,
totally.
um, if you're not developing yourself, and different kind of modes fit different people. Like for myself, like um, the forms and traditions and practices of like a traditional martial arts setting help me. And for some people, that could be a hindrance. Like you mentioned that, like those structures and the forms could be like, they might feel much more comfortable in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu setting where you have a coach and, you're still developing all those aspects,
Yes.
but it's just a very, you know, the traditional way, it becomes a hindrance, or maybe you've been burned by it too. That's another
Yeah.
thing, where I think that you mentioned these kind of esoteric concepts that get brought into martial arts. Um, I think because of movies, because of TV, because of people want that, and they want to think that they've got that. And
Mm,
especially like, when you're coming up in like the 70s and 80s and, it's still early 90s and stuff, there was a lot of the mysticism of the martial arts or romanticizing the martial arts that um, I think people use those things in maybe not dishonest ways, but not authentic ways. And like that's actually one of the reasons why like I've done my Buddhist training and got into it. That like I didn't want to be like I wanted the martial arts and Buddhism stuff to be real. That I
yeah,
wasn't just
totally.
like this talking head of like, oh yes, martial arts develops discipline and concentration and enlightenment, and that with martial arts you can be, you know, whatever. Um,
No, this is very real. We've touched on this in a number of episodes, but there's I what I always say is martial arts can do those things. Because
mhm,
I know a lot of people who it didn't do those things for.
mhm,
I have lots of people in my life, and I know of lots of people who their egoic tendencies became worse because they were empowered to be a bigger asshole through martial arts, and so I do think, yeah, martial arts has the ability to be a spiritual practice and to help you develop along these lines. But it I think what you said is a really, really important thing, in that, okay, you need the other training too. You need the if if Zen is your path, right, then you need the Zen training. If you want to do Taoism or whatever, you have to find a teacher in that as well if you want to be able to marry these two, because you're not necessarily going to get that all from your martial arts teacher.
right. And they can open the path to it. And I think a lot of things, um, and my teacher didn't go super deep with it. Like
Yeah.
it was kind of here and there, or that
Yep.
the general approach of like, hey, you need to have a spiritual life. And he
Yeah.
didn't direct us to say like, hey, you need to have this kind of spiritual life.
Totally.
but it was like you need to have a spiritual life. Like he told advanced students, like advanced students, you should be meditating as much as you're training.
Yeah,
And so, but in terms of like a hard and fast, like, hey, spiritual development process, no, like that wasn't there. He was Muslim, and we didn't really talk here and there. He'd maybe share a tidbit or something about Islam, or like, he gave me like an article on like the golden age of Islam um in Spain, and just as
yeah.
like hey, here's like it was also probably like around the time at the time of 9/11, and like, like,
He
hey,
probably didn't want to talk about
this
it.
wasn't uh always the culture of Islamic countries. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um
totally. It's very interesting too, how there are there's some martial arts that make a big attempt at integrating the spiritual practice with it. Aikido somewhat does
mhm.
that, but
Tai Chi.
yeah, I was gonna say definitely Tai Chi, um, and also like Kyudo and the like Shin Kage Ryu, the Japanese
Hmm.
styles of swordsmanship. Um, but from what I read, and I could be wrong, you did study Tai Chi, but
Hmm.
your main training was in Wing Chun and Judo. Is that correct? Or
No, I mean, I did Tai Chi the whole time I was doing, most of the time I
okay,
was doing Wing Chun too. I never got like certified in Tai Chi.
yeah,
It was just kind of like this parallel practice um that also helped with Wing Chun training.
yeah, with everything, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is like, how maybe if you the way I'll put it is if you were designing a system, if would you try to integrate the spirituality and the martial arts together, or do you think it's actually more practical to let them be parallel paths and sort of have them a little bit separate?
I would. Like I've
Yeah,
thought about that. Like in terms of even like developing like a kind of like a, I don't know, Zen warrior training or something like that, where it's like,
yeah,
hey, here's an actual path laid out
yeah,
that does integrate the two in an authentic way. And I think that's definitely something that is really missing, that a lot of
yeah,
people talk about Zen and martial arts, but there's no real like clear, structured way to practice it and understand it. And like that is a kind of goal of mine personally
yeah.
to do that. So it's authentic and real, and it's not um, you're just kind of like trying to watch the Karate Kid and figure it out.
Yeah, that's kind of something that I've been playing around with quite a bit, and it's actually quite difficult
Yeah, it is.
to design. But I have this notion. There was a not that he's the best fellow, but there was a snippet from a Bruce Francis book that really stuck with me for a long time, where he was talking about doing sparring, and that he would be sparring, and then the teacher would stop them and have them do standing meditation. And there was something about that. I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I wonder, like, I would really like to design something like this where you're doing something intense that brings lots of things up. It's like you said, the rubber meets the road, and then right when that the intensity is up and you're kind of at that fever pitch, or maybe some emotion develops or comes out, it's like boom, okay, now stop and just meditate
Hmm.
and witness this thing kind of unfold, and see what happens to it. So that I'd be curious to see you know what you would come up with. Do you think you could actually like I'm totally putting you on the spot, but like what would the Zen warrior training look like?
Oh, so
Give me your best idea.
all right. So I think there's certain practices that I mentioned a little bit, like one-pointed concentration practices. Okay. Like, all right, you're just focusing on one technique and you're perfecting that technique.
Yeah,
So there's like one practice. Okay. Flow practices. You're going through kata, you're going through shadow boxing, you're going through tai chi. And this is almost like you can relate it to like yoga too, let's say. Like, all right,
yeah,
you're focusing on one asana. I'm gonna say that wrong. There's certain words I usually only hear like I read them.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and or okay, now you're in a flow. Um, then there's like the drilling, the partner piece of it, of okay, how are you being aware and practicing and dealing with the emotions that come up in partner training of like, my partner is really kind of messing up this drill. Like they're always like, punching a little bit wrong and it's like messing up the drill.
Yeah,
Or
yeah, yeah.
let's say, it's jujitsu and you're doing um like okay, here's a good one with kids. But you're doing arm bars. When you swing around, put on the arm bar, swing around the other side, put on the arm bar. And you try and have kids do that and they're just like dead fish.
Yes, yes,
And you're like,
totally.
sit up, please, sit up so your partner can like punch the bar. Um, and so, but that brings up feelings and things you can work with. And like, okay, then there's that piece.
Yeah,
Um, and there's the sparring piece of just with your classmates. And there's like the sparring piece of competition that brings out like all these other feelings and emotions and like um, you know, I punched my friend once after a judo match because I got beat with Tanya. Like I got uh, beat like all the time with Tanya Toshi
yep.
for my first like 10 judo matches.
Oh
Uh,
man.
and I got hit with it again. I went in for a throw. I got countered. And after the match, my friend was like giving me crap about it. And I punched him in the chest. I'm like, oh, no, that's not good. That's not good. I got to work with that. I got to work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I gotta do the work. Um, and judo gave me another format to do that work.
Yeah, I think competition
Then.
is actually so valuable with that. I have a student who's, for lack of better terms, he's younger, but he's basically a genius. He is many grades ahead in school and does lots of activities outside of school. He's really, really, really smart. And but because of this, he's spent some time away from his peers and is used to sort of not he's not used to normal social environment, and he has trouble like regulating his emotions with his peers and stuff. And one of the biggest things that I think has been successful for helping him to be more emotionally regulated, more emotionally intelligent, is actually competing in jiu-jitsu and winning, losing, and dealing with those emotions and developing in that way. It's a really strong it's a bit of a heavy-handed hammer, so to speak. It's like it's a strong medicine, but it's
Hmm.
really valuable for that. I think it's one of the best things.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And in terms of like the, the process of developing these things, I think there's certain books I would choose along the way too. Um, that just to kind of have that academic study of like understanding both the kind of philosophical side of martial arts and the doctrinal side of Buddhism, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, or even just this is one thing I've kind of struggled with was like, do I make this like specifically Buddhist? Can I do it as just like Zen, not so Buddhisty? Because you
Yes.
can kind of swing that way of like you kind of leave all the Buddhist doctrine to the side, um, and don't worry about it as much. But do I do it specifically Buddhist? Do I do it kind of just general spirituality? On
Yeah.
like how do you do develop as a person through martial arts and make it kind of general? Um,
Yeah, no,
because
that's a hard call to make. I've struggled with the same thing. I mean, I have students who come from all backgrounds and various degrees of, being involved in different religions. And lots of I work with a lot of jujitsu athletes for mental training and helping them basically get their mind, good to compete. And it's tricky because a large majority of them are Christian. So I
hmm
have to figure out how to take certain things and present it in a Christian context. It's actually
hmm
led to me doing a lot of study of people like Richard Rohr and other
hmm
Christian contemplatives. And it amazes me that there's this really rich tradition of contemplative Christianity that
Hmm.
basically gets no airtime. I'm always like, what? Like, why does nobody know about this or do this? It's really good stuff. I'm digging this. I'm like, I might become Christian.
Yeah, so I kind of went from like I started off, I got into martial arts. I called myself Buddhist, didn't know what that meant, just knew I meditated. And like I had like a little figure that my mom got me, which is like super cool. And then in middle school, um I had always had this interest in like religion.
Yeah,
And um so I like went to the chaplain in Boy Scout camp and was like, "Hey, I want to like do stuff." And he was
yeah.
like, "Okay." And I'm like, he's like, "What's Easter?" I'm like, "I don't know." And he's like, here, read this Bible, read the Gospel of Matthew, because you don't know anything. Like, my family was just like, yeah, we like got Easter baskets and did Christmas, and that was like the the extent of like my like religious upbringing.
He's like, tell me about Easter. You're like, so there's a bunny.
Yeah, exactly. And then my friend was in a really conservative Christian family, and he invited me to youth group. So I started going to this youth group and like had this really meaningful experience within Christianity, like did the whole like getting saved thing,
Yeah,
um, and felt the leading of the Holy Spirit and all this kind of stuff. But then like doctrinally, I just couldn't like swallow it.
yeah,
And
totally.
that got me to I found Quakerism, and I went to a Quaker church for several years.
That's a
And
beautiful thing. It's really cool what they do.
yeah, and my college I went to was a Quaker college.
Uh,
And so
Actually, a lot of interesting. Now that you mentioned it, I'm like, there's kind of an interesting parallel between the Quaker practice and Zen.
yeah,
That you just sit there, and if somebody's moved to say something, then they say something. There's kind of like similar to the
yeah, it's
teacher-student
this
discourses.
intuitive knowing versus, this is what the book says.
Yeah.
Um, and my Quaker church actually let me start a little Zen center, and they're upstairs,
Oh, that's
which
very
was
that's very
cool.
interesting, huh?
Um, and but yeah, so my background was also in Christianity, so to speak, too. And so yeah, there's kind of always been this question of um, and the reason I come at this like this is because um, my teacher was really traditional, and my Wing Chun teacher, and we only ever had like four or five people ever like make it to Black Sash
Yeah,
and like be able to like carry on the teaching. And I saw like our classes were always really small, and um, I thought about like, okay, what if more people stayed with it? Like,
yeah,
couldn't just like, I got so much personally out of this training, and
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah,
helped me so much, and was has just been the foundation of my life that I like come back to all the time. It's like my rock. And well, what about all those people that didn't stick with it?
yeah,
Isn't there a way to make this um, still authentic and real, but not so Spartan that it drives people away? And maybe there's
yeah,
something about like the Spartanness of it that makes it, you know, be so meaningful. But I kind of come at this from a place of if there is more structure and more balance, not like somebody we work on the same six drills for a whole year.
yes,
And like that drives
yes.
people away.
Totally.
Is there a
I
way?
always I always think from like a pedagogy standpoint that pedagogies can always be better. And
Yes.
one of the things that always it haunts me, and it sounds so random, but is like the Fosbury flop, where people were pole vaulting for basically centuries and going over the bar one way, and then some guys like, okay, like I'm gonna go over it backwards, and suddenly everyone's pole vaulting much higher. And up until he did that, everybody was sure that there was one way to do this. So I always, for whatever reason, that kind of is always haunting me, and I'm always like, okay, you know what, like experimentation with a connection to tradition, right? But there's got to be a better way. Whatever we do, whatever I'm doing, I could probably do it a little bit better, if even if it's just 1% or 2%. So I'm right with you on that. If the I do feel like when my own training at and with various teachers at various points was extremely intense and extremely arduous, and there were aspects of it. My Tai Chi teacher used to try to get rid of people. You know,
Hmm.
like he used to. I was there, I think 8 years, and I was the shortest person there. After COVID, he never restarted again because he was already quite old. But
Hmm.
um, the other students were there 10 years and 15 years, and some of them had been there 30 years, so like I was the youngest one having been there for 8 years, and no one really came into the school after me. I was the last person to be a part of it, really. Um, and I remember when we started doing Bagwajang, like I did the first movement, just taking one step of walking the circle for 6 months,
Hmm.
every class for an hour, twice a week. I would try to do the first step of walking the circle correctly and get told no. Like barely any direction, just no, no, that's not it. No, try again for 6 months, and there were lots of periods with different teachers and different things that were like that where it was just brutal. And I do think that there's value in that, but that there's also a lot of value in a lot of the other stuff that I learned afterwards and what I learned through that. And that, maybe that like Spartan aspect could be like a la carte.
Hmm.
It's as Spartan as you really want it to be. Because if you had asked me, do you want to do this the easy way or the really hard way? I would have been like, I want to do it the really hard way.
Hmm.
Give it to me straight. And then if somebody else says, I'm not so sure, then maybe take it easy on them.
Hmm.
But I also think this is something that a really good teacher is doing sort of automatically, is
Hmm.
gauging the students. I'm radically different with different students. If you saw me with the 3-year-olds versus with the adults, you would think I have multiple personality disorder. And then with the adult competitors, I'm even crazier. It's like I'm basically turned into a psychopath. um, so it really depends on who you're working with. You have to kind of titrate what you're giving them.
Hmm.
um,
And what their
we're
goals are. Like that's something that
Yeah,
I've, especially teaching Wing Chun, and as I've taught Wing Chun more, and I'm like, oh, Wing Chun's kind of an old people style. So, like, I started Wing Chun when I was a teenager, and we were like, it was very hard training. And I have a lot of students that are in like 40s and 50s. And
yeah,
so, like, I'm not like, we're not dropping the medicine ball on their stomach and stuff.
yeah.
Like,
And also,
you
it
know,
should be something that develops them and makes them stronger. You don't want to break them.
hmm. Yeah.
Um, just since we're running out of time here, this has been really awesome. One last question I have for you is basically, what are some misconceptions? What are some things that people think about spiritual cultivation, spiritual developments, and that kind of drive you up the wall? Things you just like, things you wish people knew, and what are these things you hear all the time, and you're like, why are you saying this?
Um, One that you have to like blank your mind. That's
Yes.
always like a really big misconception is that somebody wants to get into meditation and they're like, I'm so distracted and so I can't meditate. No, we're all distracted.
Yeah.
That is the practice is
It's
literally
like, oh,
you're
good, you have
distracted.
some mindfulness. You're distracted.
Uh-huh. And so don't get hung up on it. Don't beat yourself up on it that you're distracted. Um, I think another thing would be you can be more gentle with yourself than you think you can. That
Yeah.
you know, life is not easy, and there are a lot of things that come up in life that, with family, taking care of kids, taking care of parents, taking care of um different things in your life where um like your practice should support you in living your life, not be this other thing that it's like I'm a bad person because I'm not meditating enough.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that, especially in the US with some of our puritanical
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's
mentality,
that Puritan
it's
mindset.
it's hard to not get get that.
I
And
see this with so many kids, man, with jujitsu and stuff, where they lose 1 point or one exchange, and they're just attacking themselves. And I'm like, hey, like you need to take it easier on yourself. You know, it's great that you have this high standard, but you know you're actually making it harder for yourself to be as good as you want to be. You know, you're eating yourself up over this, and it's just it's amazing to me how young, you know, this comes into people's minds, because these kids are 4 or 5 maybe, and they're already doing this, and I'm like, wow,
mm,
this starts really young.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
that's a really, really wonderful and really important point about the gentleness. I think that's one of the keys to, if you want to do really good like breath meditation, is learning to, when you're doing the mindfulness of breathing and you catch yourself thinking about something else, to learn to just relax first and to deal with
Hmm.
the situation with like compassion, as
Hmm.
opposed to clamping down and kind of being like, oh, I got distracted. You know, it's more just like, oh, I'm distracted. Let me relax, and we're going to bring the attention back to the breath. And then you get better at catching yourself, rather than when you clamp down, you end up wanting to ignore instances. So you'll drift off and not even know that you drifted off for some time, because you make such a big deal about it, and it's so punitive that why would you want to catch? You don't want to catch yourself if it's like that, you
And that's
know?
almost like the Soto Zen Shikantaza silent illumination. Like that's why we don't focus on something
Yeah.
because then you get all wrapped up in it.
It's also so true with like raising kids, you know, like sometimes if you're really punitive about certain things, then they just start lying. And
Hmm.
you know, they'll the first thing that'll teach them is to avoid telling you if they've done something, and then it becomes even more challenging to deal with. So it's an interesting way that, like, you know, it's kind of beautiful how the mind is so similar to reality. You know, if you learn to be intimate and close and attentive to the mind, you'll see the same sort of reflection in the world.
Hmm.
But thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate you coming on, and it was a really nice conversation. I learned a lot, so I think people will really enjoy this.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Take care.